January 15, 2009 started just like 10,000 other days, literally. And Flight 1549 initially, like all those other flights for so long, was completely routine and unremarkable for the first 100 seconds. We were traveling at that point 316 feet per second. So I saw the birds about 3 football field lengths ahead, but not enough time to maneuver away from them. And then they filled the windscreen as if it were a Hitchcock film. Immediately I could hear terrible noises from the machinery being damaged I'd never heard in an airplane before. I could feel terrible vibrations I'd never felt in an airplane before. And then the thrust loss was sudden, complete, symmetrical bilaterally, both engines at once. It felt as if the bottom had fallen out of our world. And my body responded immediately in a very normal, human way to this sudden, life-threatening stress. I was aware of that as it happened. I could feel my pulse shoot up, my blood pressure spike, my perceptual field narrow in tunnel vision because of the stress. I remember vividly my first 3 conscious thoughts. This can't be happening. Having read about many accident flights, a very typical response rooted in disbelief, followed immediately by, this doesn't happen to me. In other words, for over 4 decades, I had never been so challenged in an airplane I doubted the outcome. Followed immediately by a realization that unlike all those other flights I'd had for 42 years, this one probably would not end on a runway with the aircraft undamaged. And so even though we'd never trained for this, in flight simulators at the airline, it was not possible to practice a water landing. They aren't programmed for it. The only training we'd ever gotten for a water landing was a theoretical classroom discussion. Having flown into New York many times, I knew that there were only 3 options. There were only 2 runways that might be reachable. It turned out with reaction time they were not. And the only other place in the entire New York metro area, one of the most densely developed areas on the planet where it might be possible to even try landing a large jet airliner, would be the Hudson River. I took control of the aircraft, made one distress call, worked with the air traffic controller, considered returning to LaGuardia, decided it was unreachable, considered trying to reach the Teterboro Airport in New Jersey across the river, decided that was not reachable either. And I told the controller we're going to be in the Hudson. Our first officer, Jeff Skiles, couldn't have had a better colleague that day or since. In a situation where the time pressure and the workload were so intense, we didn't have time even to talk about what had happened and what we should do about it. He and I were able to collaborate wordlessly by knowing intuitively in this developing crisis what we should do to help the other based on our own long experience. So he made an important suggestion at several points in the flight. He was silently cheering me on as I made each decision, but ready to intervene to check my performance if he thought I was making an error. I said, I had a chance, Captain, brace for impact. And immediately, even through that armored cockpit door, I could hear the 2 flight attendants in front, Donna and Sheila, and I'm sure Doreen in the back was doing the same, begin shouting their commands in unison to the passengers. Brace, 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 heads down, stay down. Hearing those words that day encouraged me. It comforted me to know that by saying the few words I had, but choosing the right words, I had literally gotten my crew on the same page. And that if I could find a way to deliver this aircraft to the surface intact, it would float long enough for the flight attendants to evacuate the passengers and for New York Waterway to send their ferries to pick us out of the water. Right before the landing, I asked Jeff Skiles a question. I said, got any ideas? Now, some think that was a flippant remark, but it was not at all. It was just an indication of how deeply internalized these team skills are that I used to teach. I was saying to him, and he understood in context exactly what I meant, I've done everything I can think of that can help us. Are there any other actions that we can take that you can think of that would help us succeed even by a fraction? And Jeff's answer was, actually not. And he answered just like that. Not at all because he was being insouciant or not because he was resigned to an ineluctable fate. Far from it, we were fighting to save every life to the very end. He answered that way because he knew we'd done all we could. The fact that we could have that exchange just before the emergency landing of a lifetime is one of the more remarkable things about this flight and this crew and our diligence, our dedication to never give up, to try to save every life, to do everything we possibly could. And then finally, as we were approaching the water, again, Jeff collaborated with me wordlessly. He knew that the final critical maneuver was for me to try to judge visually, looking at this featureless water terrain ahead, where depth perception is inherently difficult, the height at which to begin raising the nose, to begin the landing, to trade some of our forward motion for a reduced rate of descent at touchdown, and to achieve the proper slightly nose-up attitude as we touched the water. So Jeff began to call out to me airspeed and altitude as I was looking at the water ahead to help me judge that critical height. And we were coming down so rapidly, if I misjudged it even by a fraction, we might start too soon and get too slow and hit hard, or start too late and descend into the water too rapidly in the wrong attitude. As we hit hard, but the deceleration, while rapid, was uniform. And based upon the forces that Jeff and I felt in the cockpit as we slowed to the stop, it was obvious that the airplane was intact, it was stable, it was floating, and people were probably still okay at that point. And in the most amazing coincidence, Jeff and I turned to each other at that moment, at the same time, using the same words, said, "Well, that wasn't as bad as I thought." But we weren't high-fiving. We still had to get 155 people out of an airplane taking on water in a river in January. I opened the cockpit door and shouted one word: evacuate. The evacuation went fairly quickly. Passengers and crew worked together to help out an elderly woman who had been boarded in a wheelchair. They helped a young family of 4, including a mother with a 9-month-old child. And by the time I left the airplane as the last one off, the New York waterway ferries were all around us and the rescue was well underway. But it was an agonizing 4 hours until I finally received word officially that everyone was accounted for. And only then were my immediate duties completed, when everyone was safe.